My grandmother bought me a penthouse for my birthday, but my mother tried to take it away to appease her new fiancé. Hello, everyone. I just turned 15 3 days ago, and my grandmother gave me a very rare and lovely gift. She handed ownership of her penthouse apartment to me. My grandmother does not reside there. She lives in the suburbs, but has owned the apartment for a few years and visits occasionally when she wants to be closer to the city. I was overjoyed because the previous year and a half had been a nightmare for me. First, my father abandoned our family. Even though Dad had always been a workaholic, my mother didn't even tell me about it until my father quietly walked out of the house over a year ago. Apparently, by the time they told me about it, they had already filed for divorce, and my parents had decided that they couldn't live together any longer because my father was simply too burdened. I don't know what overwhelmed him. He did not even say goodbye to me in person. He texted me one more time after he moved out, telling me to be fine. That was it. I didn't see him after that, and my parents eventually separated because our state does not have a significant waiting time. My mother was able to maintain the house and have complete custody of my brother and me. My dad had visiting rights, but he hasn't used them yet, so I'm not sure what's going on. As if that wasn't awful enough, my mother informed me around 2 months ago that she had been dating this guy, let's call him Robert, for about 3 months. They were in love, and she didn't want to waste time because she was getting older, so they got engaged. I barely had time to grasp the fact that my mother was seeing someone new. During the same conversation, she told me she was engaged and that this person would be my stepfather. It was a lot to take in, and I was disappointed since I thought 5 months was insufficient time to learn about her fiancé. But she said I didn't need to worry about it. She introduced me to him 2 weeks later, and he appeared quite closed off and aloof with me. However, he acted completely differently with my brother and was very playful with him. At the time, I assumed it was because my brother was just 4 years old, making it simpler to play with him. But a few weeks later, my mother said something that radically altered my opinion of both of them. My mother asked me to sit down with her 2 weeks ago and told me that the reason she and her fiancé got engaged so quickly was because he had been offered a really wonderful position and was going to accept it. However, in order to do so, they would need to relocate and live outside of the state. They meant to leave me here with my grandmother since my mother did not believe I would want to leave everything behind with them. I told her that if it meant staying with her, I would be willing to move away because I had previously experienced my father walking out on me and did not want to go through the same with my mother. However, she attempted to persuade me that it was a poor choice because my school friends and happiness were all present. Nevertheless, I insisted on accompanying her. Eventually, she revealed the true reason. Robert only wanted my younger brother to accompany them because he was still young and could develop a relationship with him. She said I was too old and that Robert would never consider me his daughter. He didn't like the idea that I thought 5 months was too soon for them to get engaged, and he felt I was mentally trapped in the past when my parents were still married. My mother believed this as well, which is why she wanted me to stay behind and figure things out for myself. This discovery left me extremely hurt. I expected my mother to support me, not forsake me because Robert wanted her to. I didn't mind living with my grandmother since she's a beautiful person who I adore, but I also adore my mother. I attempted to fight, but it felt meaningless, so I told her I wanted to move in with my grandma right now. Of course, moving out that day was not an option, but within a few days I had packed and was ready to depart. My mother attempted to tell me that she still loved me, but it seemed like she was only looking out for herself, hoping for a chance at happiness with Robert. I didn't speak to her during my last few days at home, and I didn't say goodbye when I left. The only person I bid goodbye to was my younger brother, who I knew I would miss. Since then, I've been living with my grandmother, who has been quite kind and sensitive. For reference, my grandmother is my mother's mother. I had no interaction with my paternal grandparents, and they had no contact with my father aside from the long trip to school. Life with my grandmother has been very straightforward thus far. She adores me and believes what my mother did was terrible. I keep in touch with my brother by phoning my mother's phone every evening, but we don't talk, it's just to speak with him. My birthday was 3 days ago, and I celebrated it at home. To be fair, I did not organize the party. My grandmother did. She surprised me by bringing some of my closest schoolmates and a few select relatives. I was feeling extremely down after my mother left me here. After we cut the cake, my grandma revealed the gift she prepared for me, which was a huge surprise. She told me that her lawyer would function as trustee for the property for the time being, but that once I turned 18 I would own everything. That was the finest news I had heard in a long time, and I had no intention of sharing it with my mother. Yesterday, however, I discovered that my mother had been notified about the present, most likely by someone at the party. I'm not sure who it was, and it doesn't matter now, but I was irritated. When she called me last evening, she informed me she had heard about the gift from my grandmother, and that after meeting with Robert, they had decided he wanted to adopt me if I convinced my grandma to transfer ownership of the property to him. I'm not sure why, but she expected me to be delighted at the news because it meant I could finally join them. But I wasn't pleased at all. I told her I was not going to do anything like that and that she no longer needed to call me. Then I hung up. A few minutes later, she called me again, but I didn't answer. Then she texted me, and this is what she sent. I'm sorry if you felt horrible because I was trying to play by Robert's rules and live life on his terms, but you must understand that after your father and I separated, he was the only person who truly cared for me. Of course, I had my family's backing, but that was different. He was there for me both emotionally and financially. You are unaware of it. That message gave me pause, but the last bit really got to me. She expected me to do everything Robert asked simply because she wanted to. It was stupid, entitled, and ineffective. I believed my mother had lost her uniqueness, so while the letter initially comforted me, it gradually left a bitter taste in my mouth. After half an hour I told her that I would not do whatever Robert had asked of me, and that she may leave with him and leave me with my grandma as she had planned. I had nothing else to say to her because, frankly, her behavior was disappointing. When I asked my grandmother about it, she said that no matter what happens, she will not transfer title of the property to Robert since she hardly knows him and does not trust him. She was confident that he would simply sell the apartment and leave me with nothing. So, in some ways, I'm glad I didn't accept my mother's request. However, my mother would not take no for an answer. This morning she arrived at my grandmother's house with my brother. Fortunately, I was at school when she stopped by. When I arrived home and spotted her in the living room, I felt the blood drain from my face. My brother dashed over to me and hugged me, but I still did not greet my mother. She acted as if nothing was amiss and attempted to put on a show with a smile, but I stood there in silence, totally unmoved. She eventually asked why I had been so distant, and I told her that I didn't want to talk to her. She explained that she had traveled all this way just to see me, and that she was making an effort. I asked why she would come and try to force me to talk to her after everything that had happened. She stated that she merely wanted me to be with her. I asked her how I could trust her after she had betrayed my trust and left me with my grandma just so she could pursue her own happiness. She didn't have a response. When I couldn't take it any longer, I decided to leave the room. She followed me and pleaded with me to sit and listen. I said I wasn't interested. She told me that I was being a spoiled brat for not understanding the situation. That made me furious. She attempted to explain things to me, but I couldn't comprehend how she was still making excuses. Finally, I told her to get out, that she should leave with Robert, that he could be the father I never had, and that I didn't need her any more. I felt terrible as I walked away, but I knew I was protecting myself. The pain was overwhelming, and I found myself crying in my room. I thought I was better off without her, but I felt shattered. When I mentioned everything to my grandmother, she reassured me that I was in control of my feelings and that I would recover. It's the part of the story I want to share, and I'd appreciate your opinions on my actions. Update: 3 weeks had passed since the tumultuous confrontation with my mother, and the weight of those events still loomed heavily over my heart. Living with my grandmother felt safe and comforting, a stark contrast to the chaos of my previous life. Each day I settled into a routine that was gradually becoming familiar: school, homework, and quiet evenings filled with reading or watching movies together. My grandmother, with her warm smile and gentle voice, was my anchor in these stormy waters. But despite the calm, my thoughts often wandered back to my mother. I could almost hear her voice pleading with me to understand her decisions, to embrace the life she had chosen with Robert. I recalled how she used to say that family meant everything, yet here I was feeling like a stranger in my own. Every time I picked up my phone, I hesitated, half expecting a message from her. My thumb would hover over her name, but I couldn't bring myself to reach out. Each time I thought of her, a mix of anger and longing churned inside me, a conflicting cocktail of emotions that left. At school, things were different too. I had always been somewhat of an outsider, but now I felt like an island. My friends were supportive, but I sensed the distance in our conversations. They didn't know how to approach me about my family situation. I often found myself sitting alone at lunch, scrolling through my phone, trying to distract myself from the gnawing loneliness that crept in when I wasn't busy. On days when my younger brother would call, his innocent laughter would break through my haze, filling my heart with a bittersweet ache. I missed him terribly, but I knew it was important for him to stay with our mother, even if that meant I wouldn't see him as much. One rainy afternoon, I was tucked away in my room, listening to the patter of raindrops against the window when my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. My heart raced. I felt a wave of dread wash over me, but I couldn't ignore it. I opened the message, my pulse quickening with each word. "Hey, sweetie, I know things have been rough between us, but I wanted to check in. Your brother misses you, and I miss you too. Can we talk?" I stared at the screen, torn between the desire to respond and the walls I had built around myself. Part of me wanted to reach out to bridge the gap that had grown between us, but another part of me was still reeling from the pain of betrayal. I took a deep breath, typing and deleting several messages before finally deciding to respond. "I'm okay, just busy with school. Hope you're doing well." It felt like an inadequate response, but it was all I could muster. I didn't want to dive into the depths of my emotions, not yet. The silence that followed was heavy, each passing minute stretching into eternity. Eventually, my phone buzzed again. "I understand, I'll let you be, but I hope we can talk soon. I love you." The words hit me like a ton of bricks. I love you, those 3 words used to hold so much meaning, but now they felt tainted. I knew I had to protect myself, but I also longed for the connection we once shared. I tossed my phone aside, frustration bubbling within me. The days turned into weeks, and I began to wonder if I would ever find resolution. One Saturday, my grandmother suggested we spend the day together, going out for lunch and then visiting a local art exhibit. I hesitated but eventually agreed, knowing that some distraction might be just what I needed. As we strolled through the small art gallery, surrounded by vibrant colors and the gentle murmur of other patrons, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. My grandmother was in her element, discussing the intricacies of each piece with a passion that was contagious. I listened as she pointed out the emotions behind the brushstrokes, her enthusiasm igniting a spark of inspiration within me. I found myself laughing and smiling. The weight of my worries momentarily lifted. Afterward, we stopped at a cozy cafe, the smell of fresh pastries filling the air. As we sipped our hot chocolate, my grandmother looked at me thoughtfully. You know, sweetie, it's okay to feel what you are feeling. It's normal to be angry and hurt. But don't let it consume you. You deserve to be happy too." Her words resonated deeply. I realized that while I couldn't change what had happened, I had the power to shape my own path. I didn't have to forget the pain, but I could choose how to respond to it. With newfound determination, I decided I would reach out to my mother, not to mend everything at once, but to open a line of communication. Later that evening, I took a deep breath and sent a message. "Can we talk sometime? I think it's time we figured this out." The reply came quickly, filled with eagerness and relief. "Of course, I've missed you so much. When would you like to meet?" We agreed to meet at a park nearby, a neutral ground where we could talk without the pressure of home looming over us. As the day approached, I felt a whirlwind of emotions, anxiety, anticipation, and a flicker of hope. When I arrived at the park, the sun was shining and the air was fresh with the scent of spring. I spotted my mother sitting on a bench, her face a mixture of nervousness and excitement. My heart raced as I approached her, every step feeling like a leap into the unknown. "Hey," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Hey," she replied, a smile breaking through her apprehension. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything hanging between us. Finally she spoke. "I'm so glad you came." I nodded, unsure of where to start. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened." "I have too," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I know I made mistakes. I was so caught up in my own happiness that I didn't consider how it would affect you." "Yeah, it felt like you were just leaving me behind," I said, the hurt surfacing despite my attempts to stay calm. "I'm sorry," she replied, tears welling in her eyes. "I didn't mean to. I thought I was doing what was best for both of us. I never wanted to lose you." The honesty in her voice pierced through my anger, and for the first time I felt the cracks in my heart begin to heal. "I just need time," I admitted. "I don't want to feel abandoned again." "I understand," she said, reaching out to take my hand. "I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust back. Just please don't shut me out completely. I love you." As we sat there, I felt a shift in the air. The anger that had consumed me began to fade, replaced by the flicker of possibility. It wouldn't be easy, and the road ahead was still uncertain, but I realized that I wasn't alone anymore. We both had wounds to heal, and while forgiveness would take time, I was willing to take that first step. In that moment, under the soft glow of the sun filtering through the trees, I finally felt like I was reclaiming my narrative, one conversation at a time. Update 2. In the weeks following my conversation with my mother at the park, things slowly began to shift. We started to communicate more regularly, texting about small things, how school was going, what we were reading, or even sharing silly memes. It wasn't a complete reconciliation, but it felt like we were laying down the groundwork for something new. My mother was more open about her life with Robert, and while I still felt some unease about their relationship, she shared that Robert was trying to navigate the complexities of blending our families, and although I wasn't entirely comfortable with him yet, I appreciated her efforts to include me in her new life. One sunny Saturday, my mother suggested we have a family day at the park, inviting my brother along. I was nervous, but I agreed, wanting to take another step toward healing. When we arrived, my brother ran toward me, his small arms wrapping around my waist in an enthusiastic hug. The sight of his bright smile made my heart swell. I realized how much I had missed him. We spent the day playing games, flying kites, and enjoying a picnic on the grass. For the first time in a long time, laughter filled the air, and I could almost forget the storm that had once clouded our family. Robert joined us, and while I felt tentative around him, he made an effort to include me in conversations and activities. There was still a long way to go, but I noticed a glimmer of sincerity in his intentions. After that day, we continued to meet regularly. My mother worked hard to rebuild our relationship. We had honest discussions about the past, her choices, and how they affected me. Each conversation felt like peeling away layers of hurt, revealing a stronger bond underneath. As the months passed, I started to feel more comfortable with the idea of my mother and Robert being together. I even began to see Robert as more than just an intruder in my life. He genuinely cared for my mother and wanted the best for us all. It was still a strange dynamic. On my birthday, just a few months later, I woke up to the smell of pancakes wafting through the house. My grandmother had planned a small celebration, complete with decorations and a cake shaped like a penthouse. My heart warmed at the thought. It was a reminder of how far I had come from feeling abandoned to being surrounded by love. Later that afternoon, my mother and Robert surprised me with a visit bringing gifts and a card signed by my brother, who had scribbled his name with a crayon. We spent the day together laughing and reminiscing about old memories. As we blew out the candles on the cake, I felt a sense of peace enveloping me. In the weeks that followed, my family continued to grow closer. My mother even invited my grandmother to join us for family dinners, bridging the gap between the two sides of my life. It was a beautiful sight to see them laughing and chatting, united in their love for me. I learned that healing takes time, and it's okay to feel a mix of emotions. My relationship with my mother, while still a work in progress, was steadily improving. I realized that it's okay to have boundaries and to take things at my own pace. I didn't have to rush into forgiving or forgetting. I could choose to focus on the present and build something new. As I lay in bed one night, reflecting on everything that had happened, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. I had navigated a storm, faced the fears that had kept me up at night, and come out on the other side stronger. I had learned to advocate for myself and my feelings, and I was finally ready to embrace the future, whatever it may hold. Life wasn't perfect, but I had hope. Hope for my family, for my relationships, and for the person I was becoming. I knew that love, complicated, messy, and beautiful, could still thrive amidst the challenges we faced. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to embrace it all.